Aloha and welcome to week 7 of CM400C. Great work on your project number 1. I should have your grades ready and posted by the end of this week. In today's lecture, I'm going to discuss the topic of designing for clients. Yes, very exciting. I will provide key information on what expectations you should have of your clients and what expectations your client should have for you as a designer. So let's get started. When you are designing for clients, you want to have a clear set of goals in mind. McKay presents some goals that you as a designer should strive to achieve. So your ultimate goals are to focus design on doing one thing quickly and efficiently. 2, optimizing for small screens and touch-based interactions. And 3, taking full advantage of device capabilities, such as internet connectivity and location awareness. You definitely don't want to strive to design for a full desktop or website functionality, because that's not what mobile is about. As a mobile designer, you need to know how to simplify and also what features to eliminate and what features not to eliminate. Remember that device capabilities on most mobile devices include location services, Bluetooth. There's also this new beacon technology, which uses Bluetooth front and rear camera, microfilm, gyroscope, accelerometer. Now there's the fingerprint scanner with some mobile devices, eye tracking, and of course tap and gesture recognition. As a designer, you need to stay up to date with the mobile hardware capabilities as devices come out into the market. You can read more about this on page 321 of the McKay text. As I mentioned in my first lecture for this class, it is important to note that designing a mobile application takes a team. Your team will most likely include a designer, you, developer or 2, and your clients. Because there is such a big investment and time commitment when it comes to mobile app development and design, it's critical that your clients be involved in the design and development phase. The last thing you want to do is keep design ideas and development from your client only for them to tell you that they don't like the product. My approach to working with clients is using a checklist. One checklist for the clients and one checklist for the designer. Let's take a look at the expectations of each. More than often, you will deal with clients who simply come to you and ask you to design an app. Unless they have gone through this process before, they will most likely not know what you need to begin the design process. So I provided you with a checklist that you can give to your clients, or you can work with them to get what you need on this checklist. The basic client checklist should include an executive summary, user personas. So regarding user personas, this can be done together. You guys can develop a user persona together. 3, you definitely want to have a design timeline. You want a list of the deliverables from your client. You want content, assets, and then, of course, other relevant background information, documents, or a website that the app is going to be connected to. So the executive summary should have the 5 W's answered. One of the most important things you will need to receive from your client is this document. You want to ask your client to provide the product concept, vision, and purpose, the app's target users, and this is part of the user persona, and information about the project program history that the app is linked to. Ultimately, the executive summary should be the guiding document from which you create your designs for your client. All right, so now we're on to user personas. User persona defines the target user or users for the designer. The client is primarily responsible for providing a clear and well-defined target user. However, an experienced designer can assist in helping the client create the personas as well. The reason for creating a short write-up or bulleted list of each respective user is mainly so the designer can come up with a cohesive design that will enable the target user or users to successfully interact with the app. Your persona should include a name, so it can be a fictional name of the user, when and where the user will use the app, general description of the tasks each type of user will perform with the app or access via the app, motivation, so what is the user's motivation to use the application, an image of the user, so once again this is a fictional image, it's optional, user attributes, which can include age, location of user, like where they live, gender, education, job title, any kind of defining characteristics that could include, is the user a student, is it a child, is it an adult, is the user very comfortable with technology? So these are all things you want to consider when putting together a user persona. Furthermore, these guiding questions that McKay provides on page 257 can also help you further simplify and better define the user persona. So he just poses a bunch of questions, and like I said, you can review that on page 257. Some of the things that he talks about is, of course, are they intermediates or novices when it comes to technology? What kind of data is involved? What are the goals? What is the language that's going to be displayed on the user interface? And of course, their motivation and the context. What are the physical conditions? Do your users work? Is the environment relaxed, casual, or high stress and fast paced? So where they're going to be using the application. And then they also talk about how many people will be using this app. So is it 100, 1,000, hundreds of thousands? So things to consider. So design timeline. It is important and imperative that you and your client establish a draft design timeline and expectations regarding the timing of your deliverables. It will also be helpful to prioritize deliverables accordingly so that you and your client can get the look and feel of your design and app flow ideas. This is also a good time to establish your rate as a freelance or contracted designer as well. Your contract should include cost estimates for agreed on deliverables matched up with a timeline. One of the most important things you want to establish with your client before you start working is a communication protocol, which also includes an understanding regarding in-person meetings or over-the-phone meetings. If clients do not respond to you, the designer, in a timely manner, it makes it impossible for you to meet your deadlines and move forward in the design process. You will need to clearly establish your expectations of your client's response time within your contract and make sure your client understands that if the communication protocol is not met, you can end the project. So as the contractor, as the designer. One more thing to add is times that you and your client meet in person or over the phone should also be paid time. So this is something you want to establish early on, that if you meet with your client, I would say generally speaking, like if the meeting's longer than 20 minutes, you definitely want to make sure that you charge for your time, because that's part of the process. So here I provided some of the deliverables that your client may expect from you. And of course, like I mentioned earlier in the contract, this is something that you guys agree upon. That's laid out in the contract. Generally speaking, your client will provide you text for titles, headings, tabs, buttons, labels for the app design. However, as a designer, you may choose to change some of the text or wording to better communicate the UI to the user. Your design should consider where you will present the required content in the app flow and the placement of the text and images in the wireframe layouts. So here I'm kind of going over what the checklist from the client, so what you should expect from them. As a designer, these are some of the assets you may be asked to design or need to receive from your client. Be sure to request high resolution assets from your client. 300 dpi is recommended for images and graphics. So definitely high resolution, because if you need to make anything larger and it's not at a good resolution or DPI, it'll get pixelated, which is what we want to avoid in our application. As a designer, you will probably need more background information on the program in addition to an executive summary. So this is your checklist. We just ran through the client checklist. As you can see, there's a lot that the client needs to provide you, the designer, in order to set you up for success. Once the client has provided you with what you need to begin your process, you can move on to your checklist. Your checklist basically includes your design process and deliverables that you and your client come up with. So the other thing to think about is they may not know what kind of deliverables that designers can come up with. So you can kind of take this checklist to your client and be like, this is basically what you can expect from me, and then you can kind of explain to them what each deliverable consists of. So McKay provides a design process that will help you make decisions around your designs. This is really important, especially if you're the only designer on your team. You're going to need to be able to make decisions. You can look at the design process in the McKay text on page 248 if you want more information. So there's 3 phases. So the planning phase, this is where you define the product concept and vision, determine target users, their goals, tasks, and problems. And then 3, determine how to prioritize by determining schedules, resources, budgets, and project themes. So much of the planning phase is provided by your client, right? 1 and 2. However, determining schedules, resources, budgets, and project themes will most likely be a collaboration between you and your client. So in the design phase, you're very much on your own in terms of what you're outputting, but you will be meeting with your client during this phase. So you brainstorm and sketch to generate many ideas. You identify best ideas by applying criteria from the planning phase. And then you propose alternative designs using prototypes or wireframes, mock-ups. If the client has provided you with everything on his or her checklist, you should be able to successfully move through the design phase. Remember that during this phase, you should set aside time to meet with your client so he or she can take a look at your ideas. When you meet with your client, it's a good rule of thumb to get his or her notes or edits to your design in writing rather than verbally. You can give your clients a paper copy or an electronic copy of your wireframes and mock-ups and ask them to write directly on those documents and maybe scan or email them to you if you're not meeting in person, so that you just kind of have a written record of the changes that they're asking for. And then there's the refinement phase. Review and evaluate quickly using expert evaluation. Perform usability testing. And then iterate as needed until you're satisfied that design objectives are achieved. So at this phase, you will provide final wireframes or mock-ups of all your designs. Remember that most of the big decisions have been made in the design phase. So this phase should not include major changes. You may be ready to perform some usability by creating a prototype of the app. All right, so if you recall from week 5's lecture, Wireframes and User Stories, wireframe involves sketching every unique view in your app flow. So views can include content in table views, text views, images, graphics, or other features. Remember that in designing each screen, you want to utilize the following questions. So I'm not going to go over in detail the wireframing process, but you definitely want to keep these questions in mind when you're building the wireframes. And then user stories. When you wireframe with user stories, it will be much easier for you to identify wireframes that you may have missed in your app flow. You can read more about user stories on page 300 in the McKay text. So what I've provided here is the general user story patterns, but make sure that I know which screen or wireframe screen that each user story is connected to. So if it's screen 1, you can put screen 1 user story. All right. Remember that deciding on color is really important, and that's part of branding. Brand color is particularly important for mobile apps, of course, because you want to stand out. And keep in mind that the color palette you choose should align with the application. You may want to consider, some of these color choices in the application. You also may want to revisit these questions. Who is the target user? So maybe like what colors would appeal to them and what kind of personality you want to give your application. So obviously this is a marine theme, so I think it would make sense to kind of stay in the blues, kind of stay in the nature colors would make sense. So I also talked about icon design, but I've just inserted the best practices here for you again. So definitely when you're considering the icon design, you definitely want to kind of stick to some of these best practices. And then we got the launch image. So this is from lecture number 4. Note that the launch image of the Skype app is a simplified version of the first screen. So the first screen is the image on the right hand side here. And that's basically, launch image is all about keeping it simple, plain, and then there should be resemblance to the first screen of the application. Just to refresh your memory, the launch image usually just pops up for like 1 or 2 seconds and then it goes straight to the first screen of the application. Asset preparation. Resolution is very, very important in mobile. Resolution refers to the number of pixels in an image. For the purposes of this class, you will prepare your assets to display at a resolution fit for the iPhone 5. And that screen has a resolution of 640 by 1136. So image sizes, work with your client to determine if image sizes will take up the entire screen or just part of the screen. It just depends what images they are and how they want them displayed. You want to make sure that they provide you images with, you know, a high resolution, so 300 dpi would be great, so that they won't display pixelated in the application. That's everything we want to avoid. In Apple's HIG on icon and image sizes, it gives you specific sizes for custom app icons. So in the tab bar, icon should be 50 by 50 pixels and no larger than 96 by 64. Toolbar and navigation bar icon should be, the minimum should be like 44 by 44, but you kind of want to stick to that size. And then if you customize buttons, you want to at least have them be a minimum of 44 by 44. Your launch image, of course, if it's locked into portrait mode, you want to keep it at 640 by 1136 pixels. And then save your files in PNG for graphics and JPEGs for images. Branding within your app is really important because it provides users with a unique and memorable experience. According to Apple's HIG for branding, they highly recommend that you be discreet and subtle when it comes to branding in your app. They recommend that you communicate your brand by choosing a font that reflects your brand. As a designer, you may decide to custom tint some of the font in your app, but I wouldn't custom tint all the font in your app. You want to choose an appropriate color palette, so I talked a little bit about that earlier. You want to customize graphics. You may want to customize a very subtle background screen image and then display them throughout your app where you see fit as the designer. So the refinement phase, this is where the fun happens. Generally speaking, the highlighter review process is a simple way to evaluate the integrity of each wireframe screen as well as its effective use of layout and screen space. Okay, so let's review. I covered a lot of material here. Let's go back to our client checklist here. The executive summary, user personas, deliverables, content assets, and then background information documents, and then a website. Let's review the designer checklist here. So these are, typically speaking, these are the deliverables that you'll have as a designer. One last thing is design success. So how do you know if you've been successful? You've met the app goals for the users. You've provided all the relevant, important information within the application, and then users don't need to turn to a full website to get more help and support. So this is how we design for clients, and I look forward to seeing your project number 2, and have a great week. Aloha.